Good evening, Jeopardy fans, and we are live once again here on hashtag Jeopardy Live Panel, presented by thejeopardyfan.com. Once again, and as always, I am Andy Saunders, and I will be moderating tonight's discussion. I'll get right into the introduction. It is just a one-on-one interview tonight. I'd like to welcome my guest. Congratulations to, and thank you for joining me here on hashtag Jeopardy Live Panel. Congratulations on your victories last week, Sean Udicious.
Thank you so much for having me, Andy. This is really exciting. I've had a chance to see a couple of your previous episodes, so very excited to be on.
Very nice, very nice. And again, thank you for joining me. So, my first question over the past few episodes, at least, has been I like it as a starting point. It seems like most Jeopardy players or Jeopardy fans, and most Jeopardy fans, as it were, have an origin story as to how they became Jeopardy fans in the first place. So, I ask you, Sean, how did you become a Jeopardy fan?
So I didn't start directly with Jeopardy per se. I was, off the top of my head, I think the first game show I remember as a kid actually was, and this was because it was the one that aired on TV at the time when I came home from school, was Win Ben Stein's Money with pre-fame Jimmy Kimmel and Ben Stein. I think that one, and I think that was a really good introduction for me because even if I didn't understand the questions, I think the humor of the show and kind of the comedy of the show kind of made it fun and made trivia fun for me.
Mm-hmm.
I think my big kind of like dive into trivia was, I'm not sure if you're familiar with this book series, but the Uncle John's Bathroom Readers.
I've got a couple of them myself. But yeah, those are an excellent book series for sure.
They were a series that I kind of got a hold of, and just the various kind of fun facts in there kind of really, I I I was really intrigued by them, and I just continued to read more and more and get the next one and the next one. And then essentially, I don't know the exact date when it necessarily started. I want to say it was like around early middle school, like so around
Mm-hmm.
sixth grade. I think is when I got the ball rolling on like watching Jeopardy. And then I sort of became of a competition between myself and my dad. And I was trying to see like how I matched up trivia wise against him. And I think it kind of gradually snowballed from there until this, for lack of a better word, obsession that's taken over my life, so to speak.
Oh, very nice. So, I hope you don't mind me asking, but it seemed like there were a couple of people who were wondering, because you definitely look pretty young in terms of Jeopardy. So, how old are you?
I'm 23. The time of filming, I was 23 and 2 months. My birthday is September 2nd. So I think that was on the younger side. Although to be fair, there were two contestants my week of filming, Alex and John Carlo, or John as they
Mm-hmm.
said on TV, who were younger than I was. So
Oh
I think
my!
the week in general, I think was just a whole youth movement, for lack of a better term.
And then, of course, we have Marty, who could pass for all of your fathers, but
He was the charismatic grandpa I never had.
we'll get back to Marty a little bit later on in the interview because I'm sure obviously being in the green room with him, you'll have some thoughts about him. But so no, I was just thinking for context, with your age and all of that was, you probably don't remember seeing Ken Jennings' original games then, because that probably would have predated your watching Jeopardy.
Um, I do remember it somewhat. I don't think I watched Jeopardy, but I wasn't as obsessed with it. It wasn't to the point where I started to try out for it and I started to
Okay.
follow it religiously. I think Ken Jennings had a certain cold personality where even if you weren't necessarily a Jeopardy fan, you became invested in it. So I think,
Mm-hmm.
to be fair, I think that was my first like official exposure to Jeopardy, just following him and kind of like seeing when the other shoe was going to fall, when he would get knocked out.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I didn't see myself as someone like competing for Jeopardy or watching it like on a daily basis until like a little bit after that. But that was my first like exposure. Ken Jennings was like on the earlier side. In fact, his book Brainiac, which he wrote about the experiences, that was the book I read on the flight over to filming.
Nice.
Try to get some osmosis
Mm-hmm.
kind of Jeopardy knowledge that way.
How much did that help?
Um, so it didn't help in terms of like kind of information. I think a lot of the information that many people know of heading into Jeopardy, like buzz in before the lights come on, like wait for Alex to finish
Mm-hmm.
speaking, don't buzz in too early or you'll lock out, where to look, how to act. Most of that's already covered in various different sources in various different ways in other kind of forms, whether it's
Mm-hmm.
online or in print. For me, I think the book was so fascinating because obviously, speaking as a winner, like you don't have a lot of time to compose yourself from game to game. And obviously, going against different opponents with different backgrounds and different strengths and weaknesses, uh, you have to be on your toes a lot. So it was very interesting to see a first person perspective of someone who had been on the show for so long and competed against so many different competitors, and just to kind of see like how his experience was like and how that affected him mentally and his own kind of way of looking at things. So I didn't really read the book necessarily as like a how-to guide to win on the show. I read it as kind of a better understanding of what the Jeopardy experience does to a person.
Okay. Okay. So, obviously you made it, you got there and you're in the green room, and then without having seen the game taped live, your name gets pulled out of the hat, as it were, and you're in on the Monday game. Do you wish you had more studio time, as it were, to kind of prepare for the experience of being on?
Oh boy, oh boy. Let me tell you, in the back of my head, as I think it was Karina Nusso was fumbling around with the names in the hat, I'm like, okay, here's the game plan. I'll probably be picked like middle of the pack. I'll get a chance to see a couple games, and then I'll see like how others react. I'll see how what sort of categories my competitors are going for. Literally, I was the first name picked, and I just remember thinking to myself like, damn. I almost felt like just walking out to my father who was waiting in the audience and being like, we should book the American Airlines tickets for a little earlier tonight, save ourselves some time. Uh, so needless to say, I wasn't terrified, but I was disappointed because I think there's a certain advantage of getting a chance to kind of see others go first and seeing how they react to stage and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. And I would definitely agree with you and say you're not the you're not the only person to have that thought. In terms of the more studio time you get, the more
Right, right.
comfortable it'll be for you. So you, how did you find the signaling device once you got up there? And were you able? Did you find yourself struggling with it at times, or did you generally? Did you think you had a good sense of how or of the timing, I should say?
It's funny because a lot of people say, in terms of like Jeopardy advice, that for the signaling device, ignore the lights that flash on the screen that tell you when to buzz in, and instead time it for the end of Alex's voice. And I did that, I felt initially, but then I noticed that I felt like I kept getting buzzed in beforehand, or not beforehand. I felt like I was being locked out because obviously, if you buzz in too early, you lock out.
Mhm.
So I just switched back to the traditional go for the lights strategy. And for me personally, that seemed to work better, at least for the first two games in terms of timing it. The third game, I think, having Marcy and John both playing, they were both excellent at the timing of the buzzer. And
Mhm.
that kind of had an effect on me where nerves started to take over a little bit. And so at that point, I was just concerned about just getting into questions at all, regardless of whether or not I knew what the questions were about, whether it was a particular strength of mine. So I just started like buzzing in willy nilly. And I think that night, the night that I got eliminated, was probably my worst night in terms of timing because being so flustered and kind of like being in the moment, you don't focus on timing as much. It kind of goes out the window. So
Mhm.
for me, I felt like my first night, even though I was the most nervous, I felt that was the best in terms of timing wise, because once I started getting the comfortable lead, I started to not necessarily psych myself out too much or let kind of like my personal feelings affect kind of my mental state in terms of taking on the buzzer.
Now, I think that's interesting that you say that, because the numbers, in terms of number of times you got in first, certainly looked even amongst your three games. Obviously, Wednesday you had significantly more incorrect responses. I think you had just one during the main game on Monday, and you didn't get anything wrong on Tuesday. But yeah, from that, that's interesting to hear that perspective of it
I mean, I
after.
could be totally wrong, truth be told. I mean, you could be right. I could have buzzed in equal times. I think just the context of where I was kind of like in my head at the time
Mhm.
kind of like gives it that effect of feeling
Yeah.
like, oh, I must have done poorly on Wednesday and better on
Yeah.
Monday, when
Yeah.
that might not necessarily have been the case.
But no, I think it's absolutely. I honestly think it's really interesting to hear that perspective over top of the numbers because the feeling can be so important about that. Now you did mention Wednesday, so I'm gonna go there at this point. Did the daily double you missed just before the first break on Wednesday, did that kind of feel like it killed any sort of momentum you had, or
Not necessarily. I felt like from the beginning, I think just because of how well Marcy got on with their buzzer, I felt like that in itself was more of a momentum killer. I wasn't too disappointed with the daily double. I knew I had to wager at least 2,000, maybe even more, to like make the daily double worthwhile. The only
Mhm.
reason I didn't wager more on the daily doubles I got my first game was because I was in a point where I was near a runaway and I didn't want to swing for the fences when I didn't necessarily needed to at that time.
Mhm.
I think the next game, so I wasn't so much disappointed about losing the daily double itself, so much as realizing that I no longer had kind of the best timing for the buzzer, and therefore I had to adjust accordingly. So I think
Okay.
that was what I think. If there was one moment, though, I think that signified like how much kind of like the momentum shift. It was during the second double Jeopardy when I missed up disabilities, and I said
Yes.
disability. I think
Mhm.
that moment was kind of I'd gotten other questions wrong at that point, but I think that was the moment that kind of was the real gut punch in terms of like kind of losing my confidence to buzz in. Because if you notice at that point of the episode, myself and then Marcy as well, but I think more in particular myself, instead of going for the larger kind of money questions, which would have helped narrow the gap between myself and John, I started going for kind of like more of the higher, lower number money questions,
Mhm.
sort of as a way to kind of like gain my confidence back. And then in hindsight, looking as a outside audience member instead of a contestant, clearly I think even if I was nervous, even if it might not have been the most confident thing to done, you needed to have gone for like more of the higher money questions in order to make up that gap. I think I was killing valuable time or
Mhm.
that I had going for kind of lower level money questions. And I think in hindsight, I think the reason I did that was because once I got the disabilities question wrong, I think kind of my confidence was permanently kind of
Yeah.
kicked down grade. And I
Mhm.
needed to find a way to kind of better build it up again, so to speak.
Though, I mean, from that perspective, I think that probably ended up costing Marcy more than you, as it were, because she she was the one who ended up $100 short going into Final Jeopardy because there were a pair of high valued clues left on the board.
That's true.
Now, um, were you surprised with Alex's first interview subject where he decided he was going to talk about your name? I presume that wasn't what was highlighted on the card.
I that presumption's correct. There were a couple stories, like the Riley story about my niece on Wednesday. That was on the card, but the last name story caught me completely off guard. I essentially had to make up kind of an antidote on the spot. There's a moment where I say that people mispronounce my name as you googly, and the truth is no one's ever mispronounced it like that. I was looking for a U name to kind of play around with, and I remembered like one of my guilty pleasure movies is Zoolander, and he uses the word you googly there. So I thought that would be a kind of a fun play on the letter U. I was completely flustered. I thought I handled myself as well as I possibly could. Um, but yeah, completely blindsided. And in a way, he also kind of blindsided me as well the second night because he asked me in particular about my job. And one of the things Jeopardy contestants are asked not to do is to give corporate plugs or to give
Mhm.
too many details about your current corporate position. That's why I was very surprised the second night that they allowed me to keep my company's name in because I think, in particular, like with Nabila's speech when
Mhm.
she was talking about differentiating between waters, they edited out some of the names of the water brands she mentioned, but they kept my company in, which I thought was very surprising. So, needless to say, it was all the first two episodes, not the third, but the first two episodes definitely kind of kept me off guard a bit
Mhm.
and required me to think on my toes for to not sound like a total lunatic on national television.
Mm-hmm. And I wish Alex would just stick to the card, as it were.
You wish Alex would stick to I wish Alex would stick to the card.
Well, I think I wish Alex would stick to the card because it usually makes for a better interview when the contestant has a general idea as to what's going on.
Oh no, absolutely. They actually edited it out. It was funny because the first episode they edited out, I guess for time reasons, the second part of his interview with me, which was the actual story that was on my card. And what that was back in college, I did theater, and I was auditioning for a show, and they told me the tip they gave was to do it more like Napoleon.
Mm-hmm.
And what they meant was like a Napoleon complex. So like do it as if you were very insecure about yourself. But
Mm-hmm.
I took their direction very literally. So I did a whole song and dance number on my knees. And they, even though it was completely different direction they asked for, they loved it so much that I ended up having to do that character on my knees for the entire rest of the run of the show. Like,
Oh,
I
dear.
got the part, but they had to like jury rig a contraption so that my knees wouldn't give out from having to like move across stage and dance and sing all while moving on my knees.
So, how did you find the reaction online to your run?
Initially wasn't so bad. I mean, I didn't have a ton of people like cheering me on hardcore, and I didn't expect to because I think Jenny, both as a contestant and then in person getting to know her, incredibly kind, incredibly sweet, someone that people can really get behind. So I even felt bad kind of beating her the first night. I was like, oh man, like out of all the people to go against, like why did you make me go against her?
Mm-hmm.
For me, there was a very noticeable shift the third night around, and I'm going to completely butcher this a second time. So hopefully, let me see if I can get this. Veterinarian,
Mm-hmm.
good,
Yeah,
cool,
yeah, good,
okay.
yeah.
Not vegetarian or whatever I said. Needless to say, there was a lot of backlash online, a lot of backlash regarding their acceptance of both that and discography, which I pronounce as discography.
Yeah.
In both cases, the judges accepted my response, even though I pronounced it the wrong way, which is something
Now,
that. No, go right ahead.
Was there a stoppage at that point while they discussed it, or was
I don't think it was a full stoppage. I think for veterinarian or vegetarian or whatever I said, I think it was like more of a brief kind of like 10 seconds maybe. So it was like a stoppage, but it wasn't like a full length, like couple minutes review the tape stoppage. I don't believe there was a stoppage at all for discography. So in either case, I think they both kind of like quickly decided it was okay. All that I kind of took away was the fact that the internet was very upset. I think part of the reason was the context of, I forget the name of the competitor, but a couple weeks before there was a contestant on the show in regards to the question said Gangster's Paradise.
Yes.
Instead of Gangsta's Paradise. And they were very strict with him. They marked his question wrong, and that difference sort of kind of impacted his success on the show. So many people were upset that sort of, they were strict there, but they were much more looser with myself. And quite frankly, like I understand that sort of argument. I think it's very fascinating that they kind of were much more lenient in my case than say any other case. Having said that, I think some people, and it's internet, it's Twitter, so it's not necessarily the best and the brightest, but a lot of people kind of went overboard. And I think seeing some of the vitriol kind of directed towards you, I think that's something that really hurts, because it wasn't like I was intentionally trying to bend the rules at all. It was an honest kind of slip up right in the moment.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I think just some people were just like, oh, he doesn't deserve to win. Oh, I'm going to make sure, like, I really hope John wins. If Sean wins, it's a disgrace. And it's like, I understand people are upset, but there's no need to make it personal, I think, especially when it's something that I had no control over.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not your fault that the judges chose to accept your pronunciation.
Mm-hmm. I'm still surprised by it, though. I understand. Again, I'm not justifying their kind of vitriol. I think it was very kind of pointed, and it was a very pointed tone. But I understand why someone may have been upset, because I think there's a definite hypocrisy there. My only kind of takeaway from it, and I could be, again, this is just from my perspective. I don't know how the Jeopardy producers or judges work. Was the fact that, excuse me, was the fact that Gangsta's Paradise is a proper title, so
Exactly.
therefore they would be treat that in a much more stricter regard. Whilst with veterinarian, sort of like a Final Jeopardy answer, like there's more leeway because it's not a official kind of word. So
Right.
therefore they could take multiple pronunciations of it.
Right. And I think
Yeah.
that, yeah, no, I'm definitely with you there. I'm certainly, I definitely think Gangsta's Paradise or Gangster's Paradise was negged because that's not the title. And had it been, Gangster, Gangsta, otherwise, maybe, possibly, but yeah. So after you lost, did you stick around to watch the afternoon games taped?
Yes. So I had my flight was with American Airlines for later that evening, and I figured my dad was my guest. My mom couldn't make it out. Unfortunately, she was a little unwell, and my brother still at school. So he was my only guest out there, and we kind of like took some time, and we were thinking, and we were like, our flight's 9 till 9 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
There's not much a lot that we can do. We've already checked out of the hotel. Um, this is could very well be my only time ever being at the Jeopardy studios in my life. Why, what's the point of just going away and not staying there? Because there were several contestants we saw that as soon as they lost, just like bolted out of there.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad's rationale was, we have no place to go for a while. This is a once in a lifetime experience, quite literally. Might as well just get the most out of it. Might as well
Mm-hmm.
just see like kind of a different perspective. And I agreed with them 100%. And in a way, it was actually very kind of fun and fascinating, having been on that stage, to see it from an audience perspective and see it kind of from that kind of point of view. I thought that was a very kind of cool kind of like way of just being like, okay, so I know what they're going through at this point. Like I was on that stage a couple minutes ago, so I understand how they might be feeling. I understand. It was a fun experience. I think it was something very valuable, and I think it was a kind of a best for me. It was a good way of getting the most out of the Jeopardy experience.
Mm-hmm. Now, how much has that carried over to watching the show afterwards? At home. How different is it watching now compared to before you taped?
I think it's gave me a ton of appreciation for the editors of the show. I think it was fascinating watching my episodes, how even little things like little hesitations, little words dropped, stuff like that, was all completely edited out, and it was one smooth, flawless product. In particular, in regards to the Thursday game, there was one question on the TV aired version was Hotline Bling. It was about the song
Mm-hmm.
Hotline Bling by Drake.
Yeah.
In person, I can actually tell you that question took roughly 15 minutes to make, because originally it was, I think the category is like gamma phone or gramophone. It was about like songs about phones.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the original question was something like Steely Dan told this person, don't lose that number.
Yep.
And the answer is Ricky, or what is Ricky, excuse
Mm-hmm.
me, because the song is Ricky, don't lose that number.
Right.
When Marty buzzed in, Alex pointed at him and said, Ricky, as if to call on him.
Yeah.
And it was pretty kind of surreal to see, because as soon as he realized his mistake, all the producers and all the judges, like the behind the scenes people of the show, they all kind of were like, oh, like high schoolers, kind of
Yeah.
like oohing at someone. They were all like having a grand old time just laughing at Alex, and the contestants were losing it too. It was probably the funniest thing I've ever seen. And so Alex is sitting there and he's literally whacking himself and saying, bad Alex, bad Alex. So we go to start up the backup question, and Alex goes to start to read it, but the backup question he's reading is different from what's airing, the new questions airing on the board. So they have to cancel that backup question as well.
Oh no.
So contestants literally turned 180 degrees, were facing the opposite wall, so they couldn't see Alex, and they had one of the writers there, and I guess they obviously had the hotline bling kind of like already saved there, but they must not have had that on a note card for Alex, because they saw a writer coming over and literally scribbling what was going to be on the third now question onto like Alex's like little notepad thing. And it was so fascinating to watch, because up until that point it had been relatively smooth. Like, even if they mispronounced something, or even if there was like a little kind of glitch with one of the questions, the game kind of moved on like a smooth machine. But seeing that, it was kind of like brought the game completely to a halt. It was hysterical, but it was like one of the weirdest things I've ever seen. Because I was under the impression he was like immaculate, you know.
This is the first I've heard of them needing a second backup question in a category like that.
It was really bizarre, because it seemed like he had a backup question to go, but what he was reading did not match the screen. So clearly there was like a disconnect there. So it was fascinating though how they had to like literally, they had a producer there and all the contestants had to turn around 180 degrees and look at the back wall. So that was pretty funny. I would have paid to see what was going on in their heads as they were sitting there looking at the back wall.
Now, was that sounds like that was kind of the only major stoppage then?
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of errors the entire week of filming. The only noticeable corrections I know was Johnny Gilbert, God bless him, he mispronounced my name one of the nights. He had to kind of redo that during a commercial break. But I don't blame him, because obviously the first night of the show was kind of all about how my name is impossible to pronounce. And then other than that, I think it was just little kind of like technical things. So I think, if I remember correctly, the first night during the Trevor Noah clue, when it was like during the audible category, the track skipped a little bit.
Okay.
And they edited that during the show, but it left kind of like an awkward moment on the edited kind of TV version where the track ends, but obviously in person it was continuing because it skipped a little bit. Right. So there's like a pause, a long extended pause, and then I buzz in. Now in person, like during the actual filming, I buzzed in as soon as the lights went on. But because they edited it to get rid of the skip, there was like kind of a little bit of dead air there. So like it almost seems like watching from home from the audience perspective, like there was a mistake and they should have like done like the little beeper sound to let us know that the question was dead. But like it was kind of funny from there, just from that perspective, seeing that. And people were like, why did you take so long to buzz in? I was like, I buzzed in right away.
Yeah, it's funny. I had the same thought too, watching at home, being like, "Wow, that took Sean quite a while for him." It's like, was he trying to figure out? Oh, that's the guy, Trevor Noah. Okay, we got it.
No, it was a quick buzz in, but like obviously with editing wise, that kind of affected how that ended up turning out. And then other than that, I think it was just kind of simple. Like Alex mispronounced one of the words, so he had to re-record it there. Nothing too crazy.
So, watching from the audience. A couple questions. How happy were you not to have to play Marty? And B, how impressive was he?
Wow. It was kind of fascinating to watch him, because if you remember the first game he's on, he kind of is slow on the gun, so to speak, in his buzzer. He almost looks like he was like a full kind of second behind Alex and occasionally John. And I think something that Double Jeopardy round kind of clicked with him. And he kind of turned it on, and he, up until I think tonight's episode, he never really stopped. Like he kind of kicked into like a hyperdrive. I'm just very thankful I didn't face him Monday, because then I would be walking home with like $1,000 instead of however much I ended up walking away. He was one of the better performers, not just obviously that day, but in my years of watching Jeopardy that I remember in particular, just because of how consistent across most of the categories he was, and how he seemed to like kind of hit everything. So it was very fascinating to watch in person.
Hmm. And I agree with you. I was amazed by some of the stuff he was coming up with. Things that I thought for sure were going to fall as triple stumpers. Marty's ringing in and confidently giving the answer. And
I think the one for me that really got me was uh Friday night's episode when he got the right stuff.
Mhm.
That's one of those questions I feel like where, and I felt the same way obviously about the Monday episode question I got wrong with Weather Channel, where the question itself seems impossible, and then you hear the answer and you kind of have like an aha moment.
Yep.
I think I remember like being in the audience that Friday and not having the slightest clue. And then as soon as I saw the words the right stuff, and it started like kind of, because
Yeah.
I always associate, I don't know about you, Andy, but I always associate the right stuff with the movie,
Mhm.
rather than the book.
Yeah.
Not saying that the book is bad, it's a great book, but I have always associated more of the movie, sort of like how Forrest Gump's a book, but everyone
Mhm.
associates Forrest Gump with the
Yeah.
movie. It didn't even cross my mind. So for Marty to kind of pick that out of the air and to
Mhm.
like get it kind of dead on like that, I thought was incredibly impressive. And as soon as he did that, I remember turning to my dad and being like, I think he's gonna last a while.
Mhm. So, online testing is coming up next month, both for the adults and for teens. So, if you happen to have any tips, as it were, for people who might be looking to try out and do the next online test.
It's interesting because for me personally, with Jeopardy, I feel like obviously the online test is necessary to go to the in-person audition, so it
Hmm.
shouldn't be totally ignored. But I feel like a lot of Jeopardy is more about how you come across kind of personally and how you come across in terms of making a good first impression. I feel like it's very difficult to study for the online test because, well, I guess it's not necessarily difficult, but there's not much I can really offer in terms of advice other than what other people have really kind of put forth, which is certain categories to reappear again. So
Hmm.
there's going to be a presence question. There's going to be an elements question. There's going to be a question about a Spanish translation. There's going to be one sports question regarding who won a recent championship. I don't think any of those questions necessarily are going to be coming out of the blue. So I think as long as you have a general knowledge there, you should be for the most part fine. I think
Okay.
once you do well there, I think moving on to the in-person audition, I think one of the important things is that you not necessarily have to be like singing and dancing and like jazz hands and all
Hmm.
that fun stuff, but I think you need to at least give the idea that like a sense of charisma. Even if
Hmm.
you don't actually have charisma, just the idea like you're fun, people love to talk to. Essentially, treat it as if you're the words I used with my friends was orientation counselor audition because in college, every year the incoming freshmen they have an orientation program and they have a select number of seniors who serve as cheerleaders for the school. So essentially, they're not only demonstrating their knowledge about the school, but they're imparting that knowledge in a very fun way, and you can tell that
Hmm.
they genuinely love the information that they're saying. And that's how I would say treat the in-person Jeopardy audition. It's not just what do you know, but can we see how happy? Can we see
Hmm.
kind of like you put forth yourself in a way that's very kind of open and friendly? I remember with my audition, there were people there who were far more intelligent than I am, but for one reason or another, it could be shyness, and
Hmm.
which is totally
Yeah.
understandable because social anxiety is
Yeah.
something that I've dealt with in my own
Hmm.
life at various points in times. It could be some other reason, but they were just so afraid to kind of let loose. They treated it almost as if like it was an important job interview. And for me personally, I think Jeopardy, I never took it too seriously, and I don't mean that in a disrespectful way, but I think it's a fun experience. You watch it with your family, you watch it with your friends. It's a communal, excuse me. There I go again with mispronouncing words. Twitter's on me again. Um, but it's a group experience. So to take it so seriously kind of takes away from it. In my audition, I felt like the only people that really kind of put themselves out there in terms of kind of like letting loose and kind of having fun with it were myself, and then a young woman by the name of Nabila, who coincidentally I ended up facing on the show, as luck would
Mm-hmm.
have it.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously, like I remember during the audition, I was thinking like, wow, like I feel like that's what they're looking for in a contestant. Like Nabila, like is really someone that I could see being on the show. And sure enough, I get on the bus, and all of a sudden I see someone pointing at me. It's like it's you, and I was like, oh God, did I like break some sort of California law or something? You know,
Mm-hmm.
it sort of like did I like wear the wrong colored tie? That was another thing too. And I won't go too far on a tangent on this, but like I kind of like wasn't sure how serious Sony was going to be about like the patterns on your shirt or the patterns on your tie. So like I spent like countless hours like, is this going to look good? Is this too red? Is this not red enough? And then as it turns out, I get there and I was like, oh wow, everyone's just dressed far more casual than I am. So that was something.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm going too far off track. My point is that to audition for Jeopardy, I would say know some of the basic topics, know the outlines of the president's elements, stuff like that. And then if you do well enough there and you get the in-person audition, have fun with it. Even if you think you're doing poor on the questions, even if you think the simulated game's not going your way, not buzzing on time, as long as you show the producers, show the contestant coordinators that you are not just a stiff, you're not just someone who's treating it as an assembly line, but someone who's embracing the fun and embracing the uniqueness of the Jeopardy
Mm-hmm.
experience, I think that will do so much more in helping you stand out than, say, rattling off all the presidents or all the world capitals like under 60 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
That's just me personally.
Okay. Well, I think that's great advice, to be honest with you.
Thank you. Thank you. Again, it's different for every person. There may be some people out there who already have that charisma and already have that kind of like personality, and they might just need help with certain topics or focusing on certain kind of like areas of their kind of like background that they just need to polish a bit. And to them, I say, like, use the J archive, kind of take the Roger Craig method of seeing what repeats itself and what comes up in different contexts. That's what I did. That was my main studying in the month between my phone call and then appearing on the show. I just browsed that archive as much as possible. I took a mental note, like, this is how many times presidents came up, this is how many times world capitals came up. And then from there, kind of devised a study plan, not nearly as in depth as Roger Craig's study plan, but like just a basic kind of outline of stepping stones of how to approach from there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, very nice. So, was there anything you thought I'd bring up tonight but didn't, or anything you want to ask me, perchance?
I guess you have a ton of great questions. I guess what's one question? It doesn't have to be like crazy, but one question I feel like that you don't get a chance to ask often on Jeopardy, or not Jeopardy, excuse me, but Jeopardy Live Talk, or one thing kind of like you've always wanted to ask Jeopardy contestants that you feel like you don't usually ask, or like one question you feel like you don't ask because you feel like, oh, it's a silly question, or like maybe like the viewing audience might not care about it much, but it's a question to you that you are personally passionate about.
Um, you know what? I will. You know what? I would say one thing I stay away from on live panel, and but one question that there are times where I would like to ask is along the lines of, what were you thinking with that final Jeopardy wager? But
No, I think that's a great question. I think that's I think in my case it's not the best question, only because my first episode was a runaway. My second
mhm,
episode I did, in my opinion, I think the most logical wager because it was to beat Quinn by one.
mhm.
And then my third episode, I guess I really should have bet $0. I don't know if I went temporarily lunatic for a moment there, but I bet like 1,200. I guess in my head I was trying to like do the math and like estimate how much Marcy was going to bet and John was going to bet, and if they got it wrong. Um, I personally, like, going back, I think my only regret with the Jeopardy experience is that the night I got eliminated, the final Jeopardy question was, these are the colors of the New York City flag. And if it
Mm-hmm.
just stayed there and it stayed with the next part of the clue, which is like two of these colors were formerly associated with the Dutch royal family and one wasn't. I think it's a beautiful question. But then it said these are also the colors of the Knicks and the Mets. And for me
Mm-hmm.
personally, and obviously there's going around online like the viral video, people think, oh, Jeopardy can know nothing about
Yeah.
sports. But in my opinion, I feel like the Mets and Knicks are two teams where anyone, let alone a guy like John, who was from New York City itself, um, they're two iconic teams where I think it would be easy enough to get. Like even Marcy, who seemed to not know it at all, was taking a guess. She at least got white and blue because
Right.
those two colors are very prominent within both those teams. I feel like that kind of question was a huge kick in the pants to me because I felt like you don't even need the Mets and the Knicks to it. I feel like that's one of my big pet peeves, both as a contestant, obviously, and then also as a viewer. When you have an excellent Jeopardy question and it kind of piques your interest and it's the right length, it's the right amount,
Yeah.
but then whoever's writing the question doesn't trust the contestant enough. And then they add a little line that kind
Mm-hmm.
of makes the question too easy.
Yeah.
And then you're kind of like, because I think part of the fun of Jeopardy is pulling
Mm-hmm.
out the facts that you didn't even know you knew
Yeah.
and getting it right, getting those lucky guesses. And I
I
feel like,
wonder. So I wonder if there was a if that came up in the pre-show writers meeting, where maybe they originally didn't have the Knicks and the Mets in there, and they put it in later.
I thought about that, Andy, and I feel like it has to be before then, only because with John being from New York, I
Mhm.
feel like that would be problematic in the sense of favoritism. Like it would
But I
almost be like
don't think the writers know who the writers aren't told who the contestants are.
okay, okay, that makes more sense then.
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Not to mention, I feel like yeah, they in a sense, I think yeah, I think you're right. I was under the impression that the writers were familiar with like the names of
Hmm.
who was going to be there that day. But if they are not familiar with that, then I think
Hmm.
that makes a lot more sense, especially in regards to the week before with the football category. I think that might
Hmm.
have made some writers a little nervous about sports.
Yeah.
I personally love sports.
Hmm.
That was, I think, the one thing that helped give me the momentum shift in the first episode was the college sports category. That was
Hmm.
the one that I felt confident about. I buzzed
Yeah.
in, I knew them all, and that gave me my early lead, and I didn't really look back from there. I
Yeah.
think so. Maybe I'm just speaking this
Hmm.
as like a sports fan, being like,
Hmm.
oh, like Knicks and Mets are too
Hmm.
easy. But I think maybe from an outsider's perspective or a different Jeopardy contestant's
Yeah.
perspective, that might have been like the perfect kind of thing to add to the question. I think that's
Hmm. Yeah.
yeah, I'd be curious to hear from other contestants, both who are sports fans and who are not sports fans, about like what they thought that about that question,
Hmm.
whether or not
Yeah.
that gave too much detail.
No, actually, I just I was just thinking something you mentioned about this the college sports category. Um, Reminded me because that was that category was called "Weren't Those College Kids Great?"
Yes,
And
and the correct
obvious,
answer is we don't know yet.
exactly, and that's where I'm going with this because you were supposed to originally air on February 23rd after the college tournament. So, at what point did you hear that your show had been pushed up 2 weeks?
So I did a bit of a boo boo where I was originally told I got an email from Glenn Kagan, or I think I forget his last name, but Glenn, who was a producer from the show, letting me know of the switch in late January. But I didn't get that entire info until a couple days after the email was sent because
Okay.
I was swamped with a bunch of different work related emails, and I just was too busy like looking at other things that I didn't bother to scroll down through like the muck because you know how sometimes like your
Yeah.
inbox will get filled with spam and other things from your boss and from
Mhm.
your other colleagues. And you're just trying to like crawl through there. Eventually, I ran across it, and for me, it was the biggest issue was like my family had like a little family event,
Yep.
family party, and then they booked it for the 19th. And then when they found out it was the 5th, they were like, ah, like we were all kind of like running last
Mhm.
minute. thankfully the venue that we had it at, they were available the 5th, and they were very accommodating. So it all kind of resolved itself in the
Yeah.
end.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a period there for like the next 24, 48 hours after seeing the email where I kind of went into full-time panic mode and was just like running across, just trying to like juggle 12 different things at once.
And I suspect you're going to be you're the first of many contestants over the next 6 weeks who will have a very similar issue.
Yes, yes. It was. I mean, obviously, it resolved itself in the end, but it was a fun sort of kind of 24, 48 hours. Just because I originally was gonna plan to like let people know like a couple weeks before the episode was aired, and then like as soon as I figured out the switch was in, just immediately to Facebook, 12 midnight at night. Hey guys, by the way, I'm sort of kind of on a national syndicated game show now. And that was kind of a big surprise for people. I was getting texts at like 2 in the morning being like, "Yo, is this a joke? Is this for real?" And I was like, "It's like no, I can tell you that's an actual photo of me with Alex Trebek." It was fun.
So, anything else you'd like to bring up, or any other questions you have of me?
No, not really. I think the
Awesome.
only other interesting story is that myself and John, who actually beat me that game, we actually went and we grabbed burgers at In-N-Out after filming.
Oh, nice.
I this is always controversial, but I don't hate In-N-Out. I feel like it doesn't live up to that. I feel like part of the reason In-N-Out has a cult following is due to its price in relation to other California foods. I feel like
Okay.
California in general is a much more expensive state, and I feel like In-N-Out keeping the same price it's had since I think the 50s or 60s, making it relatively cheap, um, makes it a much more appealing chain. I think maybe this is just having grown up on the East Coast, but I've always felt like in terms of burger quality, Five Guys is superior. And then in terms of all the kind of like the other fixings, I think Shake Shack is superior. I feel like the only thing Five Guys does in particular better than those two is the animal style kind of sauce with like the burger sauce and the pickles and stuff like that. I think that is where In-N-Out succeeds. But in terms of the big burger debate, I actually kind of prefer my East Coast burgers over In-N-Out despite the hype.
Okay.
I know,
Interesting.
Andy. I know that's the burning question. I know people on the Jeopardy live talk. That's what they've been filling the chat with. They've been asking me, like, does it live to the hype? And I have to say, I'm glad to answer the people's demands.
Well, I will say I agree with you in terms of the quality of Five Guys' burgers. We have Five Guys up here in Canada too, and I
Great
will
minds
say,
think alike.
without a doubt, Five Guys is my favorite burger. So on that note, Sean, I'd like to thank you so much for joining me on Hashtag Jeopardy Live panel this evening.
No, thank you. This was a ton of fun. It's a real shame that I was the only one here, actually, because in general, the entire group of contestants, both the returning ones, such as Jenny and John and Quinn, and then the other ones as well.
Unfortunately, Nabila wasn't available to join us this evening. I did get in touch with her, but
that's fine. My point is that the whole group was incredibly kind and supportive. I feel like heading in there, because at the beginning of this episode, you mentioned how young I was, and I think that sort of youth, being a part of a game show, being that young, is incredibly intimidating. But when you get on that bus and you have Jenny Rhodes there, who's very bubbly, and then you have Marty Cunningham there, who's very friendly and introducing like, "Hi, I'm Marty." Da, 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 da. That was my terrible Marty impression, but everyone there was so like friendly and optimistic and positive that it makes the whole experience that much better. If it had been a lot more competitive, I feel like I've been a lot more nervous heading up on that stage first. I think I've been a lot in my head more. I quite frankly wouldn't have done as well as I did, because I wouldn't be in the right mindset. But
that's really great to hear, though.
Having those individuals there, having those people there that are so friendly and so supportive, and having the Jeopardy contestant coordinators who are very helpful and supportive as well, I think that was very conductive of environment, which allowed me to succeed. I think I felt confident within myself. All my insecurities kind of faded away, and the whole experience was a net positive because of it. So I
Okay.
feel like if you ever get a chance to talk to anyone from that week, I think it'd be very interesting to hear their perspective as well, because I felt like it was a very friendly, almost kind of, I won't go as far to say like family. Like we didn't to know each other that well, but I feel it's a very kind of positive kind of connection and grouping with everyone.
Okay.
And I think having that environment as a contestant made my Jeopardy experience that much better.
Okay, well that's so great to hear. And again, thank you so much for joining me on hashtag Jeopardy live panel this evening. I'm not quite sure when next week's episode is going to be yet. Again, I will. Will it. There's a good chance it'll be Tuesday again, depending on just because I don't think I want to tape on the Monday just because it is a holiday, both in the United States and where I am in Canada next Monday. So in that case, I will see if you're tuning in. Thank you very much for tuning in, and I'll see you next week, early next week at some point on hashtag Jeopardy live panel. Have a great night.